they should change the name of The Young and the Restless to The Old and the Kidnappings, because the young characters don't get any real airtime, for one, and the only thing Josh seems to be able to write is kidnappings. Happy weekend, everybody. Something I want to start doing when I have time is go back to the roots of some of my soap opera coverage on this channel and give some rankings of the soap operas. Weekly rankings. I usually do monthly rankings. I think I'm just going to do top 5, but I want to do this because sometimes I ask myself, am I being too harsh on Beyond the Gates this year so far in 2026 where the writing is concerned? And no, I don't think I am, although they did still make my top 5, but we'll get to that when we get there. The American soap opera is not in my top 5, and this is just between the American and the British soap operas. I used to do Australian, even New Zealand, but they've become harder to find and be able to watch, so I can't really watch them anymore. But the American soap operas that you're not going to see in my top 5, at least not this week, for the week of April 27th to May 1st, you're not going to see Young and the Restless in the top 5. I mean, you're probably not going to see Young and the Restless in the top 5 if I keep doing this entire year, because it is not a good show. As long as Josh Griffith continues to be the head writer, it is just something that is not going to happen, because they should change the name of The Young and the Restless to The Old and the Kidnappings, because the young characters don't get any real airtime, for one, and the only thing Josh seems to be able to write is kidnappings. We've had Matt kidnap people 3 times now over the past few months. We've had Victor and Patty just hold Jack captive in a kidnapping. Like, it's literally the only storyline you get on The Young and the Restless these days. It's very strange that Josh Griffith is only writing kidnappings, but I guess when the viewership remains the same at The Young and the Restless, as strong as it is, when the Young and the Restless fandom just eats up all of his terrible writing, we remain stuck with him. The other soap opera is Days of Our Lives, that you're not going to see in my top 5 of the American soap operas. It is, the soap opera that brought me into soap operas. Sometimes I feel like maybe I am too harsh on it because of that, but there's like nothing worth watching on that right now. They continue to make the worst decisions. And as bad of a writer that Ron Carlivati ended up being the last several years he was writing, I don't think Paula and Jeannie, the current head writers, are any better. They are just as bad, and they are absolutely terrible at making decisions. But let's get to number 5. The American soap opera that is barely staying in my top 5 is The Bold and the Beautiful. I've talked about this on the channel the past few weeks or month or more now. I do not like the younger set, but over the past week that did not get the most airtime. Instead, what got the most airtime is the Logan versus Forrester showdown, Katie versus Brooke, Brooke still being a royal bitch, really, and Katie actually standing up for herself for once with Brooke, because Katie's trying to make a name for herself in fashion. They've also have Steffi and Hope feuding because of this again, where Hope's designs are on the shelf at Forrester, and Steffi's being rude about it and threatening. Well, she's saying that she's not doing it because she hates the Logans, but it seems that way. So Bill and Liam and Katie trying to talk Hope over to coming over to Logan. It's still poorly written because they write it in a way where Brooke and Ridge and Eric just sound so stupid, talking about how dare Katie use Eric's designs, even though Eric signed a contract and Eric wanted to do this with Katie in the first place. So the writing for it remains stupid because that's how Bradley Bell writes. I see some people online say that Bradley writes this way to troll the fans and to try and rile up the fans. Well, if you have all the time in the world to use your writing to do that instead of just trying to write a good show, I don't think it should be any higher than 5 right now in the rankings. Really, the only thing I actually liked about the past week is whatever they're doing with Dylan getting a creepy phone call, and then at the end of the week they gave us a cliffhanger, which I like, where the person who was calling, I'm assuming, who said they had unfinished business, ends up popping out when Dylan is alone working at Forrester, and she screams and says, "It's you." We'll see who the big reveal is. I'm not sure. I wasn't watching when the Luna character was on, and it feels like the fandom really wants it to be Luna. And from everything I did see about the Luna character, I do think that could be entertaining. But I don't know what it is. We'll see what it is this next week. But I guess one key thing that got Bold and the Beautiful into my top 5 was them having a Friday cliffhanger. That is a way that you should start a sweeps month. At number 4 is where I am putting Beyond the Gates. The writing for that show, I covered that soap opera the most on this channel. I've told all of my complaints. I think not only has the writing for Beyond the Gates gotten kind of bad, especially with the Impaler storyline that doesn't seem to have any cohesiveness to it. And then they insulted our intelligence with the Grayson character getting stabbed but being back on his feet that same night to walk to Ashley's apartment and then back on his feet to be able to do a drop-off. Just so stupid. So the writing is bad, but it's also a very boring soap opera. And back when I used to do soap opera rankings on this channel, I always used to ask myself, what is worse? Bad writing that can still be at least a little entertaining because at least things are happening, or boring writing? And I think boring writing is the biggest sin. So Beyond the Gates continues to fall in my top 5. 4, 5, 6 months ago, it would have been number 1 in my rankings probably. But it just falls further and further because the writing is getting worse. And I can't even think of a positive over this past week that was really like a bright spot. Like they gave us these Nicole and Ted scenes on Friday that I think were supposed to be a little heartwarming for both characters, when just the day before Ted was being lenient with Leslie when Leslie's the one that ruined their marriage in the first place. So that show right now is leaving a lot to be desired. Not even the Haley and Bill storyline can carry it anymore either, with Lynette nowhere to be found and maybe killed off. So they could fall lower in my rankings. It might fall out of my rankings. In fact, I think I'm giving it a month to get better, because when Love Island starts, I might be covering that more than I'm covering Beyond the Gates. So that is my notice to the writing on Beyond the Gates. At number 3, I am putting the British soap opera EastEnders, which I would say is probably my favorite British soap opera of them all in general. Not that it was an entertaining week. In fact, the best story going over the past week was the Dementia storyline for the Nigel character. And I have talked in the past how I don't love health storylines on soap operas because I don't want to watch a show and be super sad all the time. But that's kind of what you get with British soap operas. I kind of more so feel that way about the American soap operas. I want the American soap operas to be an escape from the real world and entertain me. What you get with the British soap operas, and maybe it's unfair if I'm ranking them together, but what you get with the British soap operas is a more gritty show that can sometimes leave you feeling very sad. And this past week with the Dementia storyline, it was the final week of Nigel being alive before the dementia did finally take him. But the story was Grant Mitchell returning, trying to get Phil to go see his friend Nigel. And we got to see Grant and Phil at their most toxic, because they have such a toxic relationship as brothers. Always really have. And Phil was having a hard time going to see his good friend Nigel, because just last year, Phil was going through depression because of all the people in his life that he was losing. So much so that he almost killed himself. And I think it was him still also dealing with his mother's suicide years later. But I think that's a great example of soap opera character-driven writing done right, because here we are a year later. Phil now has to deal with another death, and he's having a hard time doing it. But he does eventually finally go see Nigel at the end, and they did a really good job. I mean, it was extremely sad, and I'm not like... The 90s EastEnders was not my era. 2000s EastEnders was my era. So I don't have like this emotional connection to Nigel that people that were watching in the 90s probably do. I've seen some 90s. I've seen some Nigel from the 90s, but not enough to have that connection. But even still, I got emotional. I definitely shed some tears because of the way they did it with the whole stone that Phil brought to Nigel. And then we get to see what's happening in Nigel's mind before his end, where he's talking with Phil at the beach and he wanted the stone to have one last, flip in the water to skip the stone. And we see him as a child again. Yeah, so I got emotional during those scenes for sure. But it was also the writing for, like, Nigel didn't want to let go until he knew that Phil was okay. And so that's what Phil was telling him in real life, and that's what Nigel was saying in his mind, and he was finally able to let go. And it was definitely an emotional time, but very, very well done. I have also enjoyed another darker story, Ravi's whole mental crisis. It's more good character-driven writing, though, where he has PTSD following months of his health deteriorating. He has guilt for everything that he's been doing as a villain on this show. And so that's one way to, I guess, take down one of your villains on a show. Although he's kind of a gray character too. But they've done a good job there. And it didn't get a lot of time over this past week, but I'm enjoying the building of a love triangle between twins, Jasmine and Josh, and this Oscar, who is Jasmine's boyfriend. But he and Josh obviously have this chemistry, and so that can be a future entertaining storyline if they continue to do a good job there. So EastEnders is a show that could be higher on my list in future weeks if I continue to do this. But it also has boring weeks too, so it can be boring, like Beyond the Gates some weeks in my opinion, but they definitely have way better storylines than Beyond the Gates in general, right now anyway. At number 2, I put Coronation Street, who just had a murder week. That was the way that they wrote this past week of the show. I almost put it in the number 1 spot, honestly, because every episode was pretty engaging. It was kind of a stunt, though, where every episode we got to see who is a possible victim of being murdered this week. And the first 4 episodes of the week kind of gave us 4 different victims that might be who is murdered this week. And then on Friday, they kind of sort of showed more of all 4 of those storylines. One of the main storylines that's been going on this show is Todd and Theo, which is like they're showing us how there can be abuse in gay relationships too, and that is what Todd has been going through with Theo for so long. This is one of those stories, though, that have gone on way too long. All soap operas, it seems, like to truly drag out a story way too long. And in doing so, they've made Todd feel like he has no survival instinct whatsoever. And that's kind of what happened in Monday's episode again, when he was finally going to go to the airport and leave town and get away, and he kept making mistakes where he ends up back almost in the clutches of Theo. So that kind of did get annoying. The other storyline, the other character that was a possibility of being murdered this week was Carl, who is kind of another villain on this show, with Ronnie being the one to get revenge on him this week. By the week's end, we see that Carl is in the hospital, and I think even flatlining at one point, but I don't think he's going to be the victim. The other possible victim was Jody, although this was a weaker setup than the others. She's been back in town with her sister Shona. I haven't been watching enough of this storyline to really know what is going on, so I'm not even going to try and recap it. But at one point during this week, she tried to get her sister's husband, David, to kiss her, and it was kind of a lot. She had thugs after her at the beginning of the episode, which was kind of the fake out at the end of the episode when David kicks her out of the house because she just came on to him and was trying to blame him. And then someone is running up on her, but it turned out to be Lily, who's a child. So that was kind of one of the faker stories. And then the other one has been one of the other big stories going on this show, which has been the teacher, Megan, who had groomed the teenage Will and even ended up pregnant with his baby. So definitely a topical storyline that doesn't get done enough, because these women teachers really be out there wilding with their students these days. And this was one of those cases too. And Megan is definitely a villainous bitch of a character, blaming everyone else for her problems, getting into it with the Battersby sisters this week, which ended with Toya hitting her in the mouth. But then she tried to record Maggie, who in the past killed her husband, pushing him down the stairs, and tried to set her up. But that just turned into a fiasco for everyone, which ended in Will trying to break up the tension between Megan and Maggie, because Maggie was going to throw her down some stairs like she did her husband. But Will put a stop to that. And then Maggie was trying to tell Will that Megan did not lose the baby. She actually got an abortion. Will didn't want to hear it. By week's end, we see that after Will and Maggie were together having an argument, we see that Maggie is unconscious on the ground as a possible victim of who was murdered this week. But the week ended with Theo on the ground, who was the one that's been abusing Todd for so long now, which is kind of a cop-out, and that's why I didn't put Coronation Street at number 1 and just put it at number 2, because I feel like most of the fandom, especially after such a long storyline, would have rather have seen Theo go to prison and become someone's bitch, which I think was the proper end to that storyline of how to see him suffer after seeing him be an abusive twat to Todd for so long. But I think just killing him off is a cop-out, and I do think he's probably going to be the victim, if not one of the victims. So that's why Corrie's just a number 2, and I'm putting General Hospital at number 1, because while they do have some weaknesses, there's definitely some characters that bore the shit out of me, and there's definitely some plot holes in what is a very plot-driven soap opera. But over this past week, I feel like we could be setting up for a good May sweeps, and they have one of the only couples that I root for right now in all of soap operas, and that's Carly and Valentine, because I do feel like they're doing a good job with their chemistry, doing a good job building up the tension between them. There are obstacles to them being together. It's classic soap opera. And then you have Carly's stupid daughter, Joss, ratting out her mother to Brennan, to tell Brennan that Carly's having an affair with someone else. So, of course, even though Joss is supposed to be working with Valentine to take down the likes of a Sidwell and a Column, but she goes and rats out her own mom here. That was annoying, and it's why I've been complaining that I don't like Joss as a WSB agent anyway. But it gave us a good cliffhanger for GH as well, where we have Brennan finding Carly in bed. Now she's alone at the end here, but she had just had sex with Valentine, who's been hiding in her attic. But he can see that there's clothes on the ground. So Monday could be a really good episode from GH, or at least I'm hoping. And I'm really hoping that May in general is a good May sweeps. The main storyline has a lot of different pieces. The two villains at the top right now, Column and Sidwell, I still think the heroes do some stupid things to, not try and take them down, because Column killed Sidwell's son, Marco. They just need to get that information to Sidwell. So while there is a possibility of a really good May sweeps for GH, there's also a possibility of some plot holes that could make me dislike it. So we'll see if GH stays at the top of my rankings. I think Coronation Street and EastEnders are right behind them. They have just as much potential as GH. Beyond the Gates has a lot of work to do. I don't know if May's going to be great. Hopefully the Cotillion is very entertaining, but they have not been building that well either. Bold and the Beautiful is always a mess with Bradley Bell. And yeah, that about does it. I don't know what other soap opera can get into the top 5, because like I said, Days and Young and the Restless aren't doing it for me. Hollyoaks not doing it for me. Emmerdale never does it for me. And if you're watching more than one soap opera, let me know your rankings in the comments.